The final chapter I want to discuss that Victor gets into in depth is the chapter just entitled Prison Rape. Victor talks a little bit in this chapter about the rise in incidents of prison rape. And prison rape did rise, but it's very difficult for us in terms of, and we talked about this in one of our other lessons on assaults, it's very difficult to pinpoint the number of sexual assaults in prison for a number of reasons. Many prisons don't report accurate numbers for fear that they will be viewed as an institution who cannot control the inmates, and also because many inmates simply don't report sexual assaults. Reporting a sexual assault could lead to protective custody, could lead to being targeted. So there's a number of reasons we're not sure about the number of sexual assaults in prison and whether or not any of those numbers are accurate. But there was a documented rise in incidents of prison rape starting in the 1970s up into the mid to late 90s. And as part of this rise, what became sort of status quo was the idea that when you went to prison, you were subject to sexual assault. You could be. You very likely could be raped. And staff and other inmates viewed this as sort of part of the punishment. That going to prison didn't just mean removal from the world, from your family, from your kids, from your loved ones. It also meant that you may have to endure sexual assault. And that's a changing view of punishment that was incident to this rise in sexual assaults in prisons over time. Victor also talks about victims who report prison rapes. And he talks about why maybe reporting is not something that an inmate would choose to do. And he says that they seldom do. And his theory is that prisoners do not report these sexual assaults because prisons are not, quote, designed to administer justice. So the primary job of prison administrators is to maintain order and discipline while preventing escapes. He says, therefore, when a victim reports a rape to prison authorities, both the victim and the rapist will immediately be locked in isolation under different statuses. Despite these different statuses, the victim and the offender get the same basic treatment. And this is what I alluded to earlier with protective custody. The perpetrator will go to the segregated housing unit while the victim will go to the protective housing unit. Both typically have the same schedule, have the same type of context, meaning you will live the same life in the segregated housing unit that you would also live in a protective housing unit. So prisons aren't designed to handle this. Until very recently, psychological and psychiatric services for those who have been subject to sexual assault really didn't exist, really weren't given to an inmate who had endured an attack. There's very seldom a criminal prosecution, a street prosecution, we might say, where someone is charged with rape as a result of assaulting someone else in prison. And also, there's the very good chance that the victim will have to be transferred to another prison. And that victim might have friends, might have a good job, might have been, quote, dug in at this prison. So it's the victim pays a penalty for having been assaulted. And these are all reasons that these rapes, these assaults, are often not reported to authorities when they occur. Victor also talks a little bit about the tactics of prison rape. And the first group of tactics that he groups together are inmate-on-inmate rapes. Now, he talks first about strong-arm rape, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, strong-arm rapists will typically hide their faces, will rush in a cell, will attack someone at a time of day when that person is typically vulnerable, and will target newcomers, or fish, as Victor calls them. They will jump this person. They may do it in a group. This is the rarest form of inmate-inmate rape. I never saw a strong-arm rape in prison. I never even heard about one in the two institutions that I spent time at. Because there are penalties associated with this these days. There will be criminal prosecutions post the Prison Rape Elimination Act 2003. There will be prosecutions in a strong-arm rape typically. He also talks about extortion rape, and this is a very common tactic of prison rape. Extortion rape is typically very straightforward. You owe someone money, you owe someone commissary, food, you can't pay that. And in essentially return for what you owe, you're forced to take part in a sexual act with the person that you know. And if your debt is large enough, if your what you owe is significant enough, this may not be a one-time incident. It may go on perpetually, depending on your dealings with whoever it is that's extorting you. Victor also talks about date rape, where inmates will live in a double cell or in a dormitory. And in these instances, someone is befriended by another inmate. You will lift weights with this person. You will ask for protection from this person, typically. You will then move into this person's cell. Physically and psychologically weak inmates are typically the ones targeted here. And really what it is you think you've made a friend, and that person then takes part in a sexual assault, victimizes you. This, again, is a common tactic in prisons. I can't tell you that I saw this, but I did hear about both extortion rapes and date rapes while I was incarcerated. A confidence rape is much like in a date rape. Confidence rape involves someone who picks out a new inmate who then alleges to be their friend, alleges to take them under their wing. Once they're taken under their wing, they will gain their trust and then at some point engage in a sexual assault on this person who is at that point unsuspecting, because they trust that someone who has offered to help them is in fact genuine. Finally, Victor talks about drug rapes. Drug rapes are, again, very much straightforward. The rapist will convince a new person, a new cellmate, a new friend to get high or to drink prison hooch, prison alcohol. That will take place. The victim will pass out, and then the perpetrator will then rape that victim. So again, those are the groups of tactics that Victor talks about in terms of inmate-to-inmate rape. The second group of tactics that Victor talks about in his book are staff inmate rape tactics. He talks first about strong-arm rape, and this is much like strong-arm rape regarding inmate-inmate rapes. A staff member will overpower a weaker, potentially smaller inmate and rape that inmate, sexually assault that inmate. He also discusses authority rapes. Authority rapes are a little bit different. Victor seems to suggest that they involve typically homosexual staff members that are attracted to inmates. I'm not sure this is always the case. This feels like a generalization that I wouldn't go so far as to make. Really, the way that this works is staff members will promise inmates privileges or special work details, for instance, or extra food in return for sexual favors. In fact, this took place at an institution that I was at, and the corrections officer was eventually disciplined for that, as was the inmate. The last tactic that Victor discusses regarding staff inmate rapes are surrogate rapes. Surrogate rapes are a little different than strong-arm rapes or authority rapes. Surrogate rapes involve a setup, and in the chapter about David, we heard about one of these types of rapes, these sexual assaults. It's where a staff member will promise special privileges to a group of inmates or a single inmate in exchange for that inmate sexually assaulting a fellow inmate. So these are the tactics that Victor describes. Again, he uses some generalizations that I'm not sure I would go so far as to use, but it's an interesting take on prison rape and on sexual assaults in prison. And I will say that some of these tactics are tactics that I heard about, and in one instance regarding the authority rape saw when I was incarcerated. The final topic I'd like to talk about in this week's lesson is the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003. And as we mentioned earlier, prison rapes were on the rise in the early 70s up until about the mid-90s, to the point where, again, it was an accepted piece of punishment. Many thought that this was part of what you were supposed to endure when you went to prison. In response to that, President Bush signed into law S-1435, which is called the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003. And of course, it occurred in 2003. What it did was it formalized how we talk about, how we assess, and how we manage sexual assaults in prison. And first, what it did was it required the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Statistics Department, the bureau that keeps numbers on inmate demographics and various other statistical accountings for prisons in the United States, to account for sexual assaults, to try to accurately determine the number of sexual assaults that take place yearly in America's institutions. It also requires a formal board, a formal body, to conduct an analysis of the effects of sexual assaults. What are the effects? How does it change someone? What ends up happening when someone reports a sexual assault in prison? What the Act also does is that it sets up a formal system to develop information, resources, recommendations, and funding to protect individuals from prison rape. So in a nutshell, the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003, which you read about in one article for this week and also in the chapter that I assigned from Victor's book in the intro, what it did really was bring prison rape or sexual assault in prisons to light. And it formalized a structure whereby we could assess and deal with the growing problem of prison rape in the United States. Though it's fully unclear because of the issues that I talked about regarding statistics with rape in prison, many scholars believe that the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 has lowered the incidence of prison rape in the United States. I can tell you from my own personal experience, the number of sexual assaults that I heard about / witnessed were far lower than what some of the older inmates told me occurred back 15, 20 years ago in the state prisons in Pennsylvania. So anecdotally, I can say that the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 and how prisons are managed in light of that act have lowered sexual assaults, at least in my experience. It has also been my experience speaking with roughly in the neighborhood of 200 former inmates in California, Texas, Florida, and Massachusetts, that the instances of prison rape are low currently. Those who have gotten out recently have reported to me in some of my research that prison rape is a rare occurrence now and is not something that's rampant as many of them claimed it was back in potentially the 70s and 80s.